Last week, when Sabrina Erdely joined me to talk about her article in Rolling Stone, I asked her about the choices she made in deciding what details to include in the story. What I did not ask is what she decided to omit. Rolling Stone made an agreement with Jackie, the accuser in the story, not to speak with her alleged attackers. As a result, the story is mostly a one-sided account from the accuser's point of view. Rolling Stone managing editor Will Dana said on Twitter of that choice, "We made a judgment, the kind of judgment reporters and editors make every day. And in this case, our judgment was wrong. We should have either not made this agreement with Jackie or worked harder to convince her that the truth would have been better served by getting the other side of the story. That failure is on us, not on her." Joining my panel now is Chloe Angel, senior columnist at feministing.com and opinion columnist at Reuters. And you were here with me at this table last week, and we were all kind of struggling through this story. Where are you in this moment this week?
What I said last week was that this article was a tremendous act of public service, and that would still be true if they had gotten this article right. And now what we know is that this is actually a tremendous act of public disservice to survivors of rape everywhere and to the people who care about them, love them, support them, and are doing everything we can to make sure that this becomes a culture in which we honor and believe survivors of rape.
I kept thinking during this week, Dave, about because we cover issues of sexual assault on this show a lot, right. And what it means to do it in a way that is ethical, that does understand what rape culture is for people who are survivors who are coming forward, and yet also maintains a level of journalistic integrity.
Sure, and let's talk about journalistic integrity, because that's what's so important here. I'm enraged at Sabrina Erdely, and I'm not enraged because I feel like a frat was done wrong, right. Because they'll be doing a "hey, we're back" party by the end of the semester. I'm not even as enraged about the fact that this is clearly going to push a lot of survivors back into the closet, as horrible as that is. My real rage is for the fact that here's this woman, Jackie. She clearly is traumatized. She clearly has some form of PTSD, and she clearly had serious doubts about pushing this story forward. And as a journalist, that's when it should have ended. These stories should not be about re-victimizing survivors. They should be about empowering survivors and giving them agency. As soon as Jackie gave any hint of the fact that she was not sure about this story going public, that's when it should have ended, right then and there. It should not be about re-victimizing people. It should be about empowering people when these stories come forward.
Dr. Litt, so, you know, I'm a survivor who did not tell for many years and has never had any kind of legal, you know, sense of justice or any of those things for a wide variety of reasons. But sort of came of age in a time when we understood that somehow speaking your story, telling it, saying it over and over again, maybe not the details, but simply the identity of survivor was itself kind of inherently empowering. But it was also a world before Twitter. It was also a world before, you know, a level of social media scrutiny. And I guess part of what I wonder now as a member of the media is whether or not that storytelling is still empowering for survivors, if they're not going to have a legal sense of justice.
Right. I mean, that's an interesting question, because there's a lot of ways in which coming to tell your story in some fashion, you know, can be very therapeutic. Whether or not that story should take place through social media or any kind of media, that's another question. You know, certainly a lot of people do try to push the memories away, and they try not to think about what happened, and that's a way of kind of getting through early on. But over time, in treatment, sometimes it's very important to actually make sense of your story by talking about it and telling the details of the story.
But aren't there also implications for being a witness to your own story based on the kind of psychological tricks that we practice? I mean, even when we do segments on this, I always say, okay, now we're going to do Melissa dissociating on television, right? Because it's going to be helpful to me to be able to make it through this segment. And I guess part of what I wonder is then, does that make you almost a less credible witness to your own victimization?
Well, I agree so much with all these points, and I think Dave is actually spot on here. I think Rolling Stone dropped the ball in two major ways here, and one is that people in general have a very hard time with the particulars of memory. People have a hard time across the board differentiating suggested memory from real memory, and that's particularly the case in people with PTSD, because PTSD is in part a disorder of memory, and people have a very hard time remembering the particulars of events. And so in that sense, placing this woman's story as the central social narrative here opened her up to these exact kind of criticisms. And the second way that Rolling Stone dropped the ball is that they, in their statement, distancing themselves, they said our faith in her has been misplaced, which I thought.
And they came back and changed that, but it felt like that kind of that kind of re-victimization. Chloe, I want to let you have the last word on this, because I know that you then, all of us, I think, who stood by Sabrina's story here because we trusted the work that had been done, are also now in a position of needing to kind of have a say.
I think a lot of things are up for dispute in this incident. What is not up for dispute is what we know about false rape accusations, which is that between 2 and 8% of accusations are false, which means between 92 and 98% of allegations are accurate. And what is also not up for dispute is that this is going to have a chilling effect. This is going to make it harder for every person who has been raped, for the next thousands of people who have been raped, to come forward and tell their story and to be deemed trustworthy when they do. What this incident is going to do is make it easier for rapists to get away with rape.
Yeah, and I think also a chilling effect, I keep thinking about the Duke case again, a chilling effect on the social movements that emerge to support survivors so infrequently, but then when they do, a chilling effect. Thank you to Chloe Angel. Everyone else is coming back a little bit later in the show, but up next, new accusations against comedian Bill Cosby.